Hello, my name is John Reynolds. Welcome to Extraordinary Life Stories. On this episode, I'm talking with Alex Partridge. Alex is the trailblazing entrepreneur who founded LADBible, one of the world's largest digital platforms known for its viral content and influence on youth culture. LADBible became a groundbreaking media brand, attracting millions of followers and reshaping how news and entertainment are consumed online. Alex launched the ADHD Chatter podcast, where he shares his personal journey with ADHD and explores mental health topics with a focus on raising awareness and breaking stigmas. Is there anyone better placed to have perspective and knowledge on all things ADHD? I'm very much looking forward to talking with Alex, so let's get into it. Alex, thank you for joining me.
John, thank you so much for the invite.
I've been looking forward to this.
Me too.
Tell me, who is Alex Partridge?
Well, I am, if you Googled me, it would say I'm the founder of UNILAD and LADBible. More recently, I've founded a podcast called ADHD Chatter,
which I've been listening to.
Good stuff. It's a year and a half ago I started it in my bedroom in Brighton, and now we're in a very nice studio in London, and 300,000 people a month listen to it, and I was saying it's a testament, I think, to the demand for conversations on that topic.
You formed a community which actually is a constant with UNILAD and LADBible, and then the ADHD neurodiverse community. But take me back to a young Alex, the sort of early who and what inspired your kind of life and career decisions.
I think it probably all stems down to very early memories of feeling different. I've always had an internal conscious feeling of feeling like I don't belong, actually. I remember when I was at school, about 6 years old, someone in the classroom said, "You could be one of the cool kids, Alex, if you weren't so weird." And it was comments like that, really, which plagued me throughout my whole school experience. When I was 7 years old, I had my first anxiety attack in a classroom, sat at the back of the classroom, very happily daydreaming, staring out of the window. And the teacher, out of nowhere, pointed at me and said, "Alex, do you know the answer to that question?" And in that moment, I remember the whole classroom turned around and looked at me. And in that moment of pressure, my heart rate accelerated, and I abruptly stood up and ran out of the classroom and found someone in the corridor. And I said, "Please help me, I'm having a heart attack." And of course, by the time the paramedic turned up and I had calmed down and they reassured me that I wasn't having a heart attack, I was having my first anxiety attack at 7 years old. So my whole school experience was very fearful, very anxious of school. And what drives the work that I do now is the awareness of the juxtaposition between how I was presenting at school, where I was very anxious and almost unable to contribute, to how I was presenting at home when I was in an environment that I felt safe in, and I was creating businesses, I was being very entrepreneurial. And it's that contrast between how I was presenting in two very different environments that inspires me now to raise awareness of neurodiversity.
Hence the community. That is so powerful. I had a very similar experience. In fact, incredibly, the teacher jumped 2-footed onto my table and went, "Reynolds, what's the answer?" And I felt I was probably 10 years old. I was already struggling at school. Never had this conversation with anyone. I was daydreaming, but I just felt so distracted, very misunderstood. To then find myself, I guess, as an adult and find how I could work best. How did you do that? So from going from knowing you felt different, having these experiences, were you almost like holding your breath through school to then start these different entrepreneurial kind of adventures, if you like, that then allowed you to find Alex?
Well, I found Alex when I was at home. I went through my entire school experience with comments, school reports saying Alex just needs to try harder, Alex is very quiet, Alex has potential, but it never turned into anything because there was this constant layer of anxiety that was disabling me to thrive. Whereas when I was at home, the same year I had that anxiety attack, I started my first business. I went through all my parents' board games in the house and found the addresses of all the companies that manufactured them. And I spent the summer creating this board game. I made all the pieces, designed the board, wrote all the instructions, absolutely loved it. Sent it off to all of these companies. I didn't hear anything at first, but then 2 or 3 weeks later, I had a letter and it was from one of them and they said, "Alex, and I think they could tell I was 7 because my handwriting was really bad, but they said, Alex, unfortunately we're not looking for any new designs at present, but always lean into this entrepreneurial spirit.
What a great letter to get back.
Yeah, I've still got it. And it was that contradiction, juxtaposition between how I was presenting, that paralysis mentally when I was at school compared to this creativity and problem solving and enterprising nature that I was experiencing at home. And really that's why I'm so passionate about raising awareness, particularly on neurodiversity and now not only in the school system but also in the workplace.
Yes, and actually we're talking off camera and relating it to a chat that I had with Phil Anderson, ADHD 360 founder. And the stats that are coming out of the prison system, which I just mentioned to you, I heard they were 25%, and you were suggesting if everyone was able to be tested, it could be more like 80-something%. And the fact that these people probably don't even know what they've got, so therefore haven't got a coping mechanism or medication to deal with it, and it's hereditary. So whether it's the school system, sort of curriculum that still teaches us how to use a Bunsen burner, which we never use in life, whether it's the workplace that's pretty archaic in a number of ways that it's dealing with neurodiverse people, and then the prison system that's overwhelmed and underfunded. What needs to change? I imagine you're at the heart of this.
Yeah, you can see how undiagnosed, unrecognised ADHD can lead to criminality when you haven't got that awareness of your impulsivity mixed with the emotional dysregulation that is so common with ADHD, that inability sometimes to put that breaker between an event, a stimulus, and a reaction. You can see how in some situations that can lead to recklessness and doing things that go against the law. The official statistics, as you said, is 25%, but I've spoken to people very high level in the justice system who would put it closer to 85%. And there is an argument, controversial one, because I know the waiting lists are very long outside of the prison system, but to screen prisoners on entry. And if you picked it up at source or at that point, then their journey of awareness, medication, treatment could start. And once you become medicated, treated for ADHD, the likelihood of reoffending once they leave the prison system significantly drops.
I mean, you say there's an argument, controversial, but these people potentially are not able to manage their emotions, unable to be aware of why, and they're actually committing a crime that puts them in a system that we as taxpayers are paying for, and you'd want them to have help, right? Because especially if they're going to potentially have children from a hereditary point of view, that then we know how many people are influenced by parents and people around them. It's almost self-predicting that these people potentially will be offending and going into the prison system. It's a good reason in itself to be prioritising that. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, I'm for screening prisoners on entry. The argument against it, of course, is that in some areas you have to wait 8 years. If you're a law-abiding citizen, you have to wait 8 years for a diagnosis. So then, why should a criminal get a queue jump? So that's the other side of the argument, and I can kind of see both. But yeah, there's 100% a tax saving, right? If someone's not offending, then they're not going to take up another prison system. They're not going to be clogging up the judicial system. So I can see both. The answer, I think, is very nuanced and probably a lot more to discuss in a.
Of course,
yeah.
I totally get it's a bigger picture conversation, but one of the things that struck me, and it'll be a constant throughout this conversation, is that there's probably no one I could talk to that's better placed to have had your own lived experience plus those of others with the ADHD Chatter podcast, and 100 guests you've spoken to, all sharing their own lived experiences. And I've sort of asked a question already about what needs to change, and there's 8-year waiting lists. This is huge. There are so many people that are potentially aware they're affected or are unaware, and that it should be more mainstream that these people can have access to that. Why is there such a bottleneck and waiting list? Why is it not more mainstream for people to find out and get tested?
I think the short answer is that there's been a spike of awareness, which is brilliant, particularly amongst women and girls. Recently, it's been made aware that women and girls can have ADHD. 15, 20 years ago, it wasn't even thought of the fact that women and girls could have ADHD. It was purely a male thing. It's that sharp incline in awareness plus more people talking about it has put an incredible strain on an underfunded NHS, which has caused this bottleneck in the particular department of screening for neurodiversity. I think there's a lot people can do in that interim between becoming self-aware and seeking a diagnosis. I don't think you necessarily need to have a psychiatrist give you that stamp of a diagnosis before you can start going a little bit easier on yourself and giving yourself a bit of an easier time. You get the awareness piece, and you realize that if you Google what is ADHD, it will say struggle with impulsivity, struggle with forgetfulness, struggle with disorganization. And it can be those things, but I think with awareness and support, it can also be creativity and pattern recognition and problem solving and being great in a crisis and being able to derive patterns where other people see chaos. Being an entrepreneur, we see people with ADHD are 4 times more likely to start their own business. But also on the other side, it's not just a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by traits of impulsivity and forgetfulness. That's what a doctor would tell you. But I think if you spoke to people who have lived with it, it's a lifetime of being told that you're too sensitive and that you're too much and that you're too moody, and a lifetime of not understanding why you're so sensitive to criticism, a lifetime of not understanding why you have to change who you are and put on a mask in different social situations in order to be more palatable for whoever you're standing in front of at that time.
Conforming. This comes back to the education curriculum, doesn't it, being archaic? You mentioned a couple of times there the lifetime. It shouldn't be a lifetime. And that might feel like a lifetime to get to 18, 19, 20, let alone some people that are finding out very much through adulthood. What education piece do you think needs to come into schools that would have helped you not feel different and have far too long feeling like you weren't conforming to the system?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think that schools need more budget to play with. That's a whole nother conversation. I think there's a real problem there with governmental budgeting and not giving schools the resources to tackle this problem. But ultimately, awareness is key. It's just teachers and parents need to be aware of what neurodiversity is, the different forms of it, how it can manifest. I would always encourage teachers to encourage pupils and parents to work on their self-awareness as early as possible. I think if I was encouraged to work on my self-awareness at a younger age, I would have been more aware of the contrast between how I was behaving at school and how I was behaving at home. And with that awareness, I could have then flagged it to my parents could have had a dialogue with the school, and that could have been picked up a lot sooner. And then it could have been a case of, okay, well, firstly, don't put someone like that, don't put anyone on the spot unless they volunteer themselves to answer a question. How can we incorporate movement into a class? Can we incorporate different ways of learning? Perhaps somebody is fidgeting because they need to fidget in order to pay attention. Don't tell students off for fidgeting. It's that kind of stop fidgeting mentality, which can be so damaging, because I and many people I've spoken to on the podcast, we have to channel that hyperactivity that is there somewhere, and that could be tapping the foot, or it could be playing with a fidget toy, and if it doesn't channel out through some device or some mechanism, then it can end up in the mind, that hyperactivity, and that's what causes that internal chaos. It's like 7 highly caffeinated squirrels barreling around up there, each one with a different thought, pulling you in a different direction, and that's what causes the anxiety. That's what caused that panic attack when I was 6 years old.
Yeah, it's clearly so needed, and I hope if there's anyone listening and watching that we can develop this into something that parachutes into schools. We're in the JAQ studio, JAQ. Just ask a question. So much work being done there to raise awareness and break the stigma with mental health. You've come through your own journey where it was probably man up and stop moaning and stop being difficult and stop fidgeting, to it now being really embraced. There is a danger that certain people are now almost using ADHD, neurodiverse diagnoses, to then almost become, I don't want to say famous, but it's almost like they make that their identity. Are you seeing any of that as damaging what's the real kind of need to help people? Because some people are going a long way towards it, and people I know, Tanya Bardsley, who has had life-threatening, experiences with undiagnosed ADHD, to now be able to live a life she's thriving on and so on. She was saying it does feel like loads of people are coming through just wanting to talk about that now and so on, and it's diluting. You could argue that raising the awareness is what's needed, but is there a danger of certain people that are almost sort of lowering that bar? It's like, it needs to be sort of channeled in the right way. I hope I've made my point, but it's just that whole, like, certain people seem to be using it for their own personal gain.
Yeah, I think more people talking about it is always better. I think we have to be very careful with the messaging and the language that we use. What I don't think is helpful is when somebody who has achieved something great with living with ADHD comes out and labels it a superpower. I would always push back on the superpower narrative. Yes, ADHD can enable, and I think it has enabled me to do great things in business. I've sold 2 big companies, but on the flip side, before I had that awareness piece, I was in hospital on numerous times. On the worst case, nurses were telling my parents that if I had had one more drink that day, I would have died through alcohol poisoning. I have always, as I got older, medicated that anxiety that I was explaining when I was a kid through very unhealthy ways. And
was that to escape? Was that an element of not appreciating and enjoying life and just actually trying to find your own way to find some stimulation elsewhere?
It was to go the other way. The ADHD stimulated me enough in the day to run around achieving what I thought was great things. It was in the evening when I was trying to unwind and quiet those highly caffeinated squirrels I mentioned earlier. And that dopamine hit that the alcohol gave me created this allergy in my mind, this compulsion that rendered me unable to stop drinking. We see alcoholism within the ADHD community is 4 times higher than the neurotypical community, and it's that needing to unwind at the end of the day. I now exercise a lot. I now take a hot bath. I now eat carbs in the evening. I recognize that there's very unhealthy ways to sort of quiet the thing that makes ADHD great is also the bit you need to be very careful of when you're not channeling it in a positive, constructive way. And that's why I'd always push back on the superpower narrative, because a lot of the time someone will come out and say it's a superpower, but they've got a tremendous position of privilege that they're coming from, or they've got this support network around them. They've got help, they've got assistance, they've got a very a life that's been set up that has the negatives taken care of for them. And I think the danger is somebody who's just starting their journey could look at that and go, oh, okay, I don't relate to the superpower element. Not only do I have ADHD, I've got the really bad version of it, and that can then compound into that the low self-esteem and the comorbidities that come with ADHD anyway. So that's why I would think it's great that more people are talking about it, but it needs to be done responsibly and with a narrative that is balanced, that does address the positives, because there are many, like I discussed earlier, but they only come once you learn how to manage the struggles.
Because you mentioned the superpower side of things, and some of the people around me often use that term, and it's often a hyperfocus is what that's really describing. But of course you can put your hyperfocus into positives, benefits to yourself and other people around you, and the negatives. Channeling that into the positives, you have been a very successful entrepreneur and continue to be. In terms of how you put your energies into that and the inspirations behind it, which ultimately has formed a community. Tell me the journey that led into LADBible, because I want to then open up the whole community conversation.
So LADBible started when I was at university. There were countless businesses that I started and essentially abandoned prior to LADBible. When I was in my first year of university, I impulsively spent half my student loan on a 6-foot giant freezer and filled it with Tesco frozen pizzas and set up a Facebook page called Quick Pizza. And if you wanted a pizza in the middle of the night, you would message my page. I would throw one in the oven, and I had 4 people cycling around Oxford at silly o'clock in the morning delivering pizzas, but then the university shut me down because I didn't have a food safety hygiene certificate.
The entrepreneurial side of things is there, Eric. It's brilliant. I love that.
It's that learning. And also, my second year of university, that's when really Facebook exploded. And there isn't some great inspiration behind why I started LADBible. I remember being on Facebook that day. There were a couple of other pages, one called Top Lad, True Lad, and I thought I'd start something similar because that looked quite fun. And that's when I just became hooked on Facebook and growing these pages. I remember just hyper-focusing on what was good content, what was bad content, what was working, why was it working. I can now look back through that lens of pattern recognition and see that as a bit of a power that enabled me in that moment. And I just stopped going to lectures. My housemates and my family were calling me, concerned for my well-being because I just was not leaving my room. I was so obsessed with growing these pages.
Hyperfocus again, right?
Well, now I would look back and call it that, yeah. At the time, I was just in this cloud nine, zoned in. I'd never experienced anything like it. Social media gave me something that I'd never experienced before. I think I can look back now and see its addictive nature and how it's designed to maintain your attention. I think any entrepreneur who's living with ADHD and wants to start a business, it's the number one advice is to find a landscape that you can build it on that is ever changing. All of the businesses I had started prior to that, and there were about 15, we won't go into all of them, but I abandoned and quit all of them because they were very static. Social media, by its very nature, is ever changing.
It's evolving all the time, right? AI now and so on, yeah.
And because of that, it maintained my attention. And the same with the podcast now. Yes, it's a business as a podcast with 300,000 people listening every month in the studio, but really it's a brick wall made up of bricks, and each brick is an episode. Each episode is a guest, a new person to hyper-fixate on and to hyper-focus on. The same with LADBible and the social media businesses. Each platform was a different brick, each post was a different brick, and that's the key if you are an entrepreneur with ADHD, is to find a way to gamify the structure and to break up and to separate it into bricks. Because if you go all or nothing at the beginning, and you're suddenly looking at this big wall in front of you, and you've built it, because we can do amazing things in short amounts of time, but if you don't understand all of the bricks, you'll look at this wall and you'll be so overwhelmed that you'll quit and you'll abandon it.
I love that. And actually, that community side of things, and going straight to ADHD Chatter podcast, each guest brings in a gift, a sort of an item each time. You're never going to know what that is, so that keeps you stimulated. Each guest is a whole new conversation that you learn from and you share to a community that are all aligned from a neurodiverse, and probably, dare I say, plenty of people that are around people that are neurodiverse that want to and need to learn. So the social media side of things, it does get a bad rep, right? And there's the doom scrolling, there's the addictive side of it, but it's how you use it. So you're an entrepreneur that has harnessed that for good, if you like. What advice would you give to someone that's trying to be an entrepreneur, harness that whole evolution of social media and make a business out of it?
I think the business that you ultimately do, whether it's on social media or not, has to align with your core intrinsic self. Particularly true with the ADHD community. It's so easy for us to think of an idea, get super excited about it at midnight, jump out of bed, buy the domain, and within 2 weeks we're bored of it, and that domain enters the graveyard of domains because it hasn't aligned with what we're intrinsically interested in. I think with the ADHD community, when you find what you are intrinsically interested in, then we can become world-class, world-beating at that thing. I think you have to maintain that level of self-awareness, and those exercises, which I just advocate for so much, is as often as you can, I try and do it daily. I write down what happened today that made me happy, what happened today that made me sad, what did I do today that I genuinely enjoyed, what did I do today that I struggled with. As often as you can, whether it's daily or weekly or monthly, and if you do this consistently, I genuinely believe you can build up an arsenal of self-awareness that will give you an edge in any area of life, particularly important if you are an entrepreneur, because businesses, once you're over that initial honeymoon period, which is great fun at the beginning, designing the logo, buying the domain, but it will get really, really hard.
Got to be passionate
and
about
if you're not, if the business isn't aligned with your true motivations at that stage, then you'll quit.
And what about, so you mentioned setting up LADBible, absolutely fixated on the computer, probably not eating well, sleeping well, all the things that, at what point did you pull that balance back? And I was interested to hear the sort of coping mechanisms you do now, the hot baths and the things that work for you, but you've got to find that. How did you go from someone that could have made yourself very ill, but ultimately very successful at the same time, to then get the balance?
Again, a consequence of the self-awareness exercises is really becoming aware of what you're good at and what you're not good at. And it's so important to have that awareness and to delegate the stuff that you're not good at. We're all good at stuff, we're all not good at stuff. And it's easy, particularly I find with the ADHD community, is to try and do everything yourself. There's this fear of delegation, fear of losing control. You have to let go of that and delegate it. If I hadn't done that with social media early on, if I hadn't done that with the podcast, now 100% I would have become overwhelmed and quit. The second thing is, as a consequence of not doing that, is becoming aware of what your early signs of burnout are. Like, all of us will experience burnout, and we have to know when that's approaching and when to take the foot off the gas and to take a break. We've all got early indicators of when that might be approaching. Mine is certainly an increase in irritability, and my partner will bring me up on that. My diet, I think, is quite good, but if I start ordering takeaway food, that's for me an early sign. If my exercise routine stops, if I start taking my dog on shorter walks, little things that are very nuanced and bespoke to the individual person who's listening. I transfer data from a computer to a camera most days, and we all know how you have to right click and eject the floppy disk USB stick properly. If I start yanking it out of the computer, I know that that's a sign that I probably need to take a break.
These are all shortcuts, aren't they? They're all little things that show irritation and just getting frustrated. And so that's early signs for you of burnout. And
yeah,
you take action.
And they will be different for everyone. Everyone listening, their early signs will be very unique to them, and it's really becoming aware of what those are. And when you start noticing them, then take that break, even if it's a day off, or you lie on the sofa for a few hours. Think about, are you really prioritizing your sleep? Being aware of the early signs of burnout has been a savior for the longevity of the companies.
Yeah. If someone was watching or listening now and sees the journey you've been on, sees the things you've achieved and are doing, and they're an aspirational entrepreneur, what advice would you give an aspiring entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think working on the self-awareness piece is fundamental. Recognizing the early signs of burnout is so key, and really making sure that you're doing it for yourself as well. I think lots of people, again, as a consequence of not working on their self-awareness, will do stuff for the wrong reasons. They'll do stuff because their girlfriend made a comment, or their parents want them to go into a particular field, or someone said something to them when they were 12 and they feel like they need to prove them wrong. I think it's really making sure that what you're doing is aligned with your intrinsic values, because I genuinely believe that is the only way to have that sustainability that you need in order to achieve that success.
Yes. And actually touching on that, you just mentioned that the people around you are so important, right? And I think it goes back to Alex Partridge has built a community around you, from the kid at school that felt isolated and not part of the system, if you like, to then actually flourishing. I feel very lucky to have been able to speak to you, because I've learned a lot, and I think there's a few things about myself that make me think I should probably go and get myself checked out from an ADHD point of view. But talking to you, who's probably spoken to so many people, there's a lot that resonates. It's really cool what you're doing. And thank you for making time to talk to me.
Appreciate
Thanks,
the
Alex.
invite. Thank you so much.